And if we look at some correlations between size, age, and council size, interesting things evolve. First, we see that there are correlations between assets and age and council size, and they're not as strong around council size, possibly due to the changes in the protocols that have come about. Second, we see that research performance is really the only form of university performance where we get a correlation, and it's positive. It's positive with age, strongly positive, and it's also positive in terms of council size. In terms of the other areas of performance, we don't see any statistically significant relationships, and really interestingly is there's very little correlation between the three performance measures of research, education, and equity, which kind of tells us that these three outcomes may not be well related, so that they may in fact be competing, which kind of makes sense. I mean, you spend more time researching and do less time educating people. You open things up through greater equity, performance, and access, and you open the possibility that there's systemic problems in society biasing against these people, so your educational outcomes may not be viewed as good as others. So for those reasons, we've got three quite distinct outcomes that we're looking from universities just in these ratings from the Good University Guides, which suggests a highly complex environment. Did some regressions. As you can see, council size non-significant anywhere, but even when it's non-significant, we see that it's positive in terms of research and negative in terms of education and equity, so countervailing effects depending upon the outcome you're after. Again, we see this strong positive relationship with age, and in research we're explaining 60% of the variation through this regression. Education equity much smaller. Again, just treat these with caution. They just give us a rough idea rather than saying this is, actually a really robust relationship. But it does help us draw some conclusions when you look at it with the anecdotal evidence, with the theory. Small is better when you're after efficiency, clear goals, and you want innovation above stability. Big is better when you actually have to mobilise lots of resources in an unclear environment where your goals aren't sure, where stability and building up that human capital over a long period of time is more important than innovation, and efficiency isn't central for what you want. So some suggestions. If you're going to have a bigger council, you're going to need more formality, more committees. Work in meetings is going to be more symbolic, and you're going to go for effectiveness in terms of linking to the environment rather than efficiency at a council or senate level. If you're going to go smaller, you're going to run into problems around purpose loss or linking to your environment, being clear about what you need to do. So you're going to need to spend more time and have more mechanisms around goal definition, engaging with your key constituencies, PR, and you're going to really try and gain your competitive advantage in efficiency rather than effectiveness. And, to be really controversial about it, if you wanted to make any recommendation in this about bringing council size down, surely you'd have to go to 8 to 10 or 10 to 12. Otherwise, you're still getting the process loss and you're losing those links loss. So, it's kind of like being half pregnant around the 16 to 20. I'd suggest, unless you've got good reason, that that's the number of constituencies that you want. But to mandate it, when most areas in Australia are going for things like an if not, why not approach, kind of doesn't make a lot of sense empirically and theoretically from what we've just seen. So, small is more efficient, big is more engaging, balance your governance based upon your purpose. So this really kind of brings us to the thing of, are we asking the right question? And most of the stuff that's talked about in terms of university governance or recommendations is often based on corporate governance. But is that what we really want? If you actually looked at the performance of the Forbes 100, 1917 to 1987, 100 companies, 61 would be dead, no longer operating. 21 would be operating, but they're not in the top 100. 16 would still be in the top 100, but they would have underperformed the market, let alone the top 100. And 2 would have outperformed the market, Kodak and GE in this sample, and Kodak's gone by the wayside since then. So when you actually look at it, the system underpinning corporate for-profit governance is that of creative destruction and turnover in companies. And yet, we've seen the high correlation between age and performance in the university sector in Australia and internationally. So it causes you to pause whether you'd actually want to put those kind of recommendations in place. And again, these kind of slides are just showing the complexity of what the governing body's being asked to do, because they're here to promote the university's interest, not anyone else's, the university as a whole. So what does that mean? So we look at the objects for a uni, and what you can see when you read some of the objects in the Act is that these are highly complex and actually often competing goals, or at least competing for resources. And so part of the problem facing the university is deciding amongst these competing goals. So you've got to ask, is the problem that we're putting the cart before the horse? Because we're talking about reducing board size for efficiency, right? When in actual fact, we may need a larger group to define the goals and to balance out these competing interests. I'm not the first person to make these points. A number of people have pointed to university governance being different from corporate governance, and further, that we may get quicker or more efficient decisions, but not necessarily better decisions. In fact, the book Wisdom of Crowds talks about the idea that many people or more people can be better than a few experts. In fact, the whole theories of markets is probably based on that idea when you really think about it. And by way of example, there was Sir Francis Galton, who the inventor of, well, the discoverer of correlation and regression, who, when he went to a fair, saw a fully dressed bull people were betting on trying to get the weight. He collected all the tickets and all the guesses, thinking he was going to prove that the average person was no good at guessing the weight. And what he did was, when he worked out what the mean, or median depending upon which version of the story you read, when he looked at the mean, the mean weight guessed was 1,197 pounds, and the bull actually weighed 1,198. It was very close. So sometimes when people have buy-in from a large group, you get better outcomes, particularly around complex areas such as these goal trade-offs that we're talking about. And you've only got to look back to Ken Arrow's work in his thesis in the late 1950s, early 1960s, the Nobel laureate in economics, talking about whether, when you have competing goals and when there are different preference functions among individuals, it's impossible to have one clear social function. So it's impossible to come up with one solution that's best around, in our case, education, research and equity. And in fact, you need groups of people coalescing around this in order to work out that preference set. In fact, that's why we have democracy, which kind of leads you to the point of, well, why don't we extend this logic and say, let's reduce the size of Parliament down to 5 people? I mean, surely we'd get quicker decisions. And, I'm being a bit facetious, but it's the same kind of argument that is being put forward about arbitrarily reducing council size. I think you might find some solutions to the efficiency problem in other organisational forms, industry associations, professional associations, general not-profits, where in fact they draw a subset from the council into a smaller board or executive committee to try and get the best of both worlds. In fact, if you look at Harvard's structure, that's what they've done with the board of the corporation versus the reverend overseers, which are a much larger number. That may also address some of the issues about council members acting in the best interest rather than for a specific constituency. But I think that's a whole different question other than size, and it's not necessarily best solved by looking at size. And if you're listening to this, you'll know by now that the idea here is that small is more efficient, big is more engaging. You've got to balance your governance based upon your purpose. And if you listen to this, you'll be doing it on YouTube, so you know about that. And unfortunately, I can't take questions, but I'd love to get them on my email there. So thanks very much.